Hello and welcome to the Heads and Volleys podcast with me, Lee Dunn. It's Friday of the United Soccer Coaches Convention in Baltimore 2020, and I don't really know where to begin. This whole event is so overwhelming. There's so many people to talk to. There's so many ways that you can follow, or so many pathways that you can end up down within this convention, because you can follow the route of watching everything on the field, or you can follow the route of following a certain license or diploma through the United Soccer Coaches that you can pursue when you attend a certain amount of and a certain type of lectures or seminars. Or you can just go with the wind and end up in the exhibition hall, the technology hub. You can end up in so many places. And I think I'll start with the fact that I interviewed Dan Abrahams, and he was such a genuine guy. And as we're sat there just talking post-interview, we are joined by Keith Tozer from US Futsal. He sits down, he has no idea who we are. Not that he should know who I am, but definitely I think everybody should know who Dan Abrahams is. And that was actually part of our conversation too. And then Keith he introduced himself, he introduced the fact that he has a podcast also, and then we go full circle. He and Dan do know each other, and then he is also heading to my part of the world, and we are now planning this futsal program, and I can join in with him. And he's saying to me, come and join our regional futsal. He is working with a guy who I know in Sacramento, and this is two huge guys, two huge programs of soccer that if you put yourself out there and if you're open to the fact, then you can find yourself in these environments. So if you travel with a friend, brilliant, but just open up and get away from that, because this is a genuine example of finding yourself in a situation where you probably wouldn't be, or you wouldn't even plan on being. But it turns out that the conversation with Keith was so valuable because he also has his own podcast. He followed through on a couple of things that we talked about. We took a brilliant picture, and it's just one of those things that you can truly put down to the convention. And I don't think I would have that opportunity, or anybody would have that opportunity to talk to Dan Abrahams the way I did, but then also be able to connect with people like Keith in just a regular environment. So if you're not here, get here. And if you are here, let me know what happened to you. What was the most unique thing or the most crazy situation that you found yourself in? Let me know on Twitter @LeeDunnSoccer, or leave me a voicemail. I'd love to know. So I'm going to break down today, as I have done yesterday, in terms of the sessions I went to, the biggest takeaways. I'll tag the people in this too, so perhaps if they listen, they are able to also push out their takeaways or their biggest lessons from their own in subjects or seminars or field sessions. So absolutely take a listen, let me know what you think, and here we go. So funnily enough, I'll actually start with a meeting I held with Saul Isaacson-Hurst. You may be familiar with him as my personal football coach. He has an incredible story of his pathway into where he's at. He was coaching in the academy with Tottenham for a little while. Then he was at Chelsea also, and explaining the influence of the money from Abramovich coming in as the ownership, and how everything just changed because of not only this input, but then also this professionalism that came through with it too. So he now also runs his own app, and it's all about this idea of developing players as individuals and encouraging them to become a player. And I shared the individual or the technical development aspect of training, and I asked, and it was a crowdsourced podcast, my recent one. And I go to the individual because I personally believe that an individual, from where I grew up, an individual should be able to have the foundation from which we can elicit the technical requirement of the game. Whatever your game model is, I need a player to play in a certain way. The technical foundation should be there, or at least I am familiar from an environment where that technical foundation is. And I think that things like My Personal Football Coach, and there's lots of other things out there that's very similar to it also, but those are the way forward, I believe, in terms of just gaining this environment, or creating this environment for players to gain an edge, to become that next level, to be able to commit to something that is good for them to become a better player elsewhere. And I don't necessarily agree with dribbling through cones, or what are some of the aspects of these types of apps or registrations. But I think that if we are able to engage with a player on their level, so I'm talking about the app that Sol has with My Personal Football Coach, that you are able to then get that kid in their environment. The video is on their screen. Then if we can get on their screen, then they are able to copy it. And even if it just lights that fire, I have my interview with Eric Oman coming out soon about how he lit a fire for me in terms of coaching. And the same is for the players. If I can show them videos that are exciting to them and just light that fire for them to try a little bit more or to do something a little bit different, then who am I to say no to that? I want them to have every opportunity that they can get. And that's pretty much what I talked about with Sol. So definitely check out my personal football coach. It's a free plug for Sol right here, but it's something that I'm going to bring into my programming in San Francisco as an additional benefit for these players that are playing within our additional supplemental programming. They're playing maybe because their parents are making them, but also because they hopefully have a genuine interest in playing the game. So if I can provide something to them that will just give them that extra advantage or that extra edge, or at least, as I said, light that fire, then we're talking. So, Sol, it was a great meeting. I am really excited to be pushing out this material with the players that are willing to go a little bit further with us. And then my day led me into the Innovation Hub at the convention just outside of the exhibit hall with the Coach's Voice. And many of you may become or may be aware of the Coach's Voice. They have these incredible tactical videos or conversations with coaches like Mourinho or Aitor Karanka. And what they have is the Coach's Voice Academy. So they have plenty of content, and a lot of the content is free if you look for them on YouTube or on social media. They have their own website too, but a lot of it comes out via social media. And they have now created the Coach's Voice Academy, which is a subscription, and I think there's a lot of value in it. But they talk about the coaching cycle, and all of their online courses that they provide within the academy are with a coach, and you can follow that coach's pathway from who they are as the coach to what they are providing through their course, through the Coach's Voice Academy. Then they run a session that was pre-explained in the course idea, followed by a coach's review. So it's like they're almost like 4-module coaching courses. And the one we saw with Aitor Karanka was about him and his role with Middlesbrough when he took Middlesbrough from the Championship into the Premier League, and then a certain tactical adaptation he made when he was playing against Arsenal, and the team shape, the team functions, how they would defend. He likes to play in a 4-2-3-1, but he recognized out of possession he could play a 4-4-2 and identified the need to play a little higher because then they could condense the middle of the field. Arsenal wanted to push their fullbacks higher and wider, which meant that he had a chance to exploit those spaces when they won the ball from packing the midfield. So it was a super interesting, even just a snippet, and that's something that is coming out from the Coach's Voice and their Coach's Voice Academy. So top work from those guys. Even if you just enjoy the free material that you see on the Coach's Voice, enjoy it, share it, share it, like it, whatever it takes from you to either learn something, even if it's just something that piques your own interest, but also something that you can perhaps take away to your own environment. Just remember that you're not playing against Arsenal. Even if you like to play a 4-2-3-1, you're playing against a good team. Identify the nuances that they have and then begin to think about it logically, step back from it. And that's exactly what Aitor did. Recognize what Arsenal like to do, what are their strengths, and then their strengths lead to weaknesses. And it's a bit like when a player presses, that's a good thing for your team because that leaves one player open somewhere else. So it's really interesting. It's just more amazing content that's out there, and their access to the people that are part of their Coach's Voice is super incredible. So you get to hear guys like Gareth Southgate and Jose Mourinho. So Coach's Voice, that's the one for you. Then I dropped in on a seminar, and I've done a lot of psychology track this round of the convention, and I dropped in on Max Trenery and Christina Fink. Christina was a Olympic high jumper, and Max is he's part of the director of coaching, the Plymouth United Soccer Coaches, and he is a psychologist. And the topic was supporting performance through psychology, and it seems really simple, but it began with focus and the idea of you are going to lose focus. And a simple example that Christina did, she put her hand up and said, focus on my hand for 5 seconds. Well, we can do that. And then asked us what she was doing. Her hand was rotating. She had a watch on. You could see elements, or you could at least pay attention for 5 seconds. Yet she said, okay, my hand's up, pay attention for an hour. And instantly it was kind of like, well, I don't know if I could do that. And we ask our players to come to practice, and we ask them to focus for an hour, for 90 minutes, however long our practices are. And then when they don't focus for the entire time, we get mad or we're annoyed. And I often tell coaches it's their own fault for the quality of their sessions, but it's still a subject that we are annoyed about. Why are you not focused? So then if we reframe that, as I've learned so much about in this convention, of let's address the disruption, whatever the disruption may be. You're working with younger children. Yes, that is a fire truck that just went past the field. And that's a genuine example from me and my own experience, where the fire truck goes past the field, and 5 of the kids turn around and are completely amazed by the fire truck because the lights are on, it's noisy, it's flying past at speed, and it's exciting. So now address the disruption, and then simply ask the question of, can we move on, or can we return back to this? So you're acknowledging it, and it's safe for the players, and then can we go back to this? And she gave an example of working with a bunch of middle schoolers and drawing a stick man. So she draws the body and then draws the head just 4 inches to the left of the body, and everybody kind of laughs about it. That is a distraction. So she acknowledges that, and it was a simple psychological test about the distraction, and then says, oops, I put it in the wrong place. Where should I put it? Great, I'll put it there. Can we move on? Great. So what was suddenly something that everybody was giggling about is now something that has been acknowledged, and then we've moved on. So it's not so funny anymore, or at least something that's not lasting. Then we talked about, or she talked about, I just simply watched, but we talked about motivation. The idea that competence or something that is too hard can be too overwhelming. If it's too easy, then it's too boring or it's unengaging. And I think maybe you may be familiar with that. I know I certainly was. But the idea of stretching your environment, that there is enough challenge, and I talk about this with Dan Abrahams too, but there is enough challenge for these players to genuinely struggle. They talk about the difference between math for kids that are in USA and kids that are in Japan. Why were kids better at maths in Japan than they are in the USA? And they found that through all of their studies, 2% of the time, children in the USA were struggling. In Japan, 40% of the time, children were struggling. So 38% more struggle for the children in Japan led them to finding their own solutions. It led them to being challenged so much more that they became better at the problems, they became better at mathematics. So really understanding how you stretch your players, how you are challenging your players, and then not giving them the answer, not providing the solution. And actually it was discovered that in Japan they were giving them the wrong answer sometimes to confuse them more and to help them to really break down and prove the teacher wrong, which I think is a really interesting concept. Imagine with your players on the field and saying to them, yeah, you should absolutely pass there, and then for them to figure out that that's probably not the best idea, and here is another way that we found around it, coach. Then talking about autonomy, that the choices in your environment are relative to who you are and your experience. So if the choice is to pass to one cone, well, that's great, but that's not really either game specific, and it's not really about the player having some level of autonomy about what they're doing. So we're providing game situations, we're playing these expansive rondos, or even just a simple small-sided game of a 3v3. The choices are endless. Now, for a player, they have the autonomy to decide what they want to do in that environment. Now we're able to see what they know, what they don't know, and we can ask them questions. As I interviewed with Eric about asking players in a hot review, what did you see there? Help me understand what you saw. Not why did you pass there, that was a silly decision, but actually what did you see, and help me understand what you are going through. We talk about belonging. So how the players feel in the environment that you've created. Do they belong? Do they feel like they are a part of the team? Are they chastised on the outside because they are late to practice? And I heard a gentleman yesterday talking about, what do you do with players that are late? And I mean, often it's not their fault, but he said if the player is late, then the entire team does 20 push-ups. And the presenter said, that's fine if you feel like that's the way forward for you. But personally, I would not do that, because now that player is facing all sorts of social pressure to be there on time. So you may have answered the problem in terms of getting them there on time, but then the next problem that we see is that this individual is being punished in a personal way that you just don't quite understand, that maybe they have some issues going on. Maybe there was just traffic. Maybe it was a one-off. Perhaps their parents are having an issue that that player has no control over because the parents are driving them. So really understanding what the belonging aspect of your environment is. And then they talk about a really interesting point of the environment in terms of parents. And we like to talk about parents. Parents are a hot topic as a soccer coach, and often there's a lot of blame their way. And the idea that if a soccer parent talks badly about you, or they don't like you, or they don't like your environment, they tend to share that with the kid, or at least the kid understands that the parents don't like you. And then that kid comes to spend time with you. Now think about how much they see you. So if you're in a typical environment, you train in 2 or 3 times a week. I train 3 times a week for an hour and a half. That's 4.5 hours. Then I have games, which are typically a 2-hour window. If I play Saturday and Sunday, that's another 4 hours. So I see this player for 8.5 hours. The age of the player that I'm working with, they are rotating teachers. So they see that teacher once or twice a week. So I see them more than the teacher. I see them more in depth than they perhaps do with their parents on a typical week with 2 games, because parents take them to school, then they get home from school, then they go to bed, or they come to practice and then they go to bed. So they're spending so much time with me that if their parents don't like me or like my environment, that kid is in a really uncomfortable situation, because they're going into a space where their parents don't like it per se, and perhaps they're still coming anyway. Now, how does that kid feel about being in a place that their parents don't like? Well, typically, players or individual children are told not to go to bad places, and if a parent thinks it's bad, they're going to tell their player that. But then there's this situation where the player is being dropped in your environment, which is going to be incredibly confusing, and you may find that players start to remove themselves, they start to withdraw, or maybe you just lose them altogether. So this idea of belonging for the player, but then also for the parent. Imagine walking over to the parents on the sideline and saying, hey everyone, here's what we're doing today. Here is what our focus is. Here's what our practice topic is. Here's where we are in our game model or our periodization. And then letting them know exactly what's going on. And I'll cover more with Todd Bean shortly about the presentation of what a practice is, but absolutely understanding that what the player is walking into is so valuable. I talked about goal setting, and I tweeted out just the line that blew me away, and I don't even know if Max meant it, but he talked about, in terms of goal setting, you may use the smarter analogy, or you may use something else with your players, but can you be better than you were? Can you be better than you were? Not extrinsic motivation like winning competitions or tournaments or trophies, but can you just be better than you were? So what are our goals in terms of being a better person? How do we measure them? How do we say to ourselves, yes, we've actually tried? And think about the current environment where even if you see a child in a grocery store in their soccer gear, typically the first question is, did you win? Then think about a player that associates the game with winning. Now, not many teams can win. Only one team in the Premier League can win, per se, win the division, win the league, go on to the Champions League. One team can win the Champions League. One team can win the World Cup. So if our genuine question is, did you win? This player begins to associate soccer or playing with winning. Now they are not winning, and we're losing players because they're not winning. Therefore, they feel like they are losing, and no one wants to be a loser. But technically, this year in the Premier League, there'll be 19 losers if we look at it like that. And I talked about that before in terms of redefining success in the early days of this podcast. And I really want to encourage our conversations to be about, did players have fun? Did they achieve whatever goals they achieved for the game? Or if they didn't have a goal, let's create a goal for that game, and it might be scoring a goal, but it might also just be being the best that they can be. And I talked with Dan Abrahams about that, and that interview is coming out real soon about what you can do for every individual that you work with. I sat in on a incredible session last year with a gentleman called Brett Ledbetter, and his book that he released at that time was called What's Really Important, and it's about this personal reflection about what's really important for you. And he has some incredible exercises in it, and this one was about what drives winning as a team. And he'd been working with the Gonzaga basketball program, and it just, the content is so valuable. There were some interviews in there. He also had Bill Bezic on stage with him, who had coached he'd been part of the English FA, he'd been around some incredible soccer people within England, and would ask these questions and then refer to Bill for his opinion on what was going on. So he started with two questions that you can ask everyone and anyone, and you could do this with your team too, and I'm going to regurgitate as best as I can, but it was about the top 3 things that get in the way of my team maximizing their ability. So you take a piece of paper, fold it in half. Here's the first question. Top 3 things that get in the way of my team maximizing their ability. And it's important to note that these are things we can control. So referees is not going to be a problem. The opponent is not going to be something we list here. Then flip it to the other side and then write down what your biggest personal struggle that many people do not know about. So what is your biggest personal struggle that not many people know about? So then you take that and you identify what those top 3 things are that get in the way of ability. So then what you do is you take that list of things and then you begin to create your team goals. Maybe you find trends on the list that players are identifying. That's something that we as a team can achieve. And they mentioned that as a team, we can solve or we can begin to address everybody's individual issues, which I think is super valuable. And he talked about Gonzaga wanting to create a brotherhood, something that everybody is equal in that environment. And they did this by following those questions. And then the personal struggle is something that you can understand about as an individual. So you can take that and know exactly who they are. And there was some really bad stuff out there that somebody had commented that they didn't like who they saw in the mirror. And that's a really deep personal issue that I think is being created with the environment in a lot of youth environments and even in the competitive environment. So knowing that about your players, I think, is so valuable that you can at least have a conversation with them or address them and let them know that you care about them and you're there for them. So then Bill makes a really good point where he said that we're asking ordinary people to do extraordinary things. We're asking ordinary people to do extraordinary things. If you think about that, we are asking a kid who may be a good soccer player, who may not be a good soccer player, to go and do something that is extraordinary, to go and beat a player, to go and control a ball that's passed to them at a certain speed or a certain velocity. They're asking a player to put the ball in the goal against another person. That's an extraordinary thing because everything we're taught about is being a good person and being connected to everybody around us. So he says that if you can start with a genuine care for that individual, you genuinely care about them, that they are a person first before they're a player, we're going one step further forwards in our relationship and in encouraging them to be extraordinary. Then he goes down through this idea of the top 3 things, then identifying in a group setting whether the answers are human or whether they are sport. So the answers they could be a focus or a fear, or the sport attribution could be control or opponents or competition, and identify what the trend is. So that as a sport, you should have your game model, I believe. You should have your philosophy and your way of doing things. But then as the humans, you can begin to address that with team building, with team cohesion, and you can really understand where your team's at and then push your team for success. As I guess the title of the seminar was about what drives winning for a team. Now we're talking about bringing these individuals together for the greater good of the team. So then the questions move into, how does society see your success? So the typical list included winning, it included social media likes. And again, this is with the Gonzaga basketball team, that they have this national, I guess, appreciation for who they are as a successful team. They win a national championship is what they're talking about doing there. Then the second list is, what is important to you? So people are writing things down like it's family. Some of them are religious, so they talk about their religious aspects. Some of them are talking about just being accepted or being included. So then when you look at the two lists of what society defines as success and then what the individuals or what matters to the individuals, the simple question is, why do we care about what society says in terms of us becoming a winning team? And Bill gave a really good story about a NCAA football coach who had made it to the playoffs, and all season Bill had been on his sideline and had been encouraging him to be a positive guy, to be inclusive, to be this all-encompassing individual. And then as they got to the playoffs, it became an issue of, now there is pressure from the athletic director. Now there is pressure from the media. Now the coach begins to lose his foundation of being understanding and being encompassing, to start blaming, to start challenging, to start pushing. Now he becomes a different person and his team loses. And Bill strongly attributes the way he was talking to them in the changing rooms and before the game to this need to win. So suddenly he becomes successfully judged by what society says and not by what the goals they had created. So I think that's a really interesting aspect to take away for you. And they ask some really good questions. That one of them is, what will make a teammate run through a wall for you? So if you are having team meetings, perhaps you're just about to get going for the season. Now we've had a winter break. What better way than getting your team together and asking them, what will make a teammate run through a wall for you? So you begin to create these standards and these expectations from all of your players. And maybe you've already done that, and maybe I'm 6 months behind the curve, but that really stuck out to me. And then the last question here was, who will hold themselves to a higher standard than the outcome requires? And the simple explanation was that, again, back to Gonzaga, they were doing 11 sprints. The coach told them it was 10, but they did 11. And it was simple that it was always just one more. You do more than required, so that when it comes to the game, the idea is that you're so used to going above and beyond that this is no different for you to just challenge yourself a little bit harder or push yourself a bit more in those times of need. And we all talk about this need for a player, or this wish to have a player in our environment that knows what to do, and we can really push themselves further. This is something that we can really do here. So Brett Ledbetter, you can get his books. I really recommend it. It was a huge kind of focus shift for me when I brought his book about what really matters, because it really does cover things like that idea of what does society see and what do you see, or what matters to you, because now you begin to adjust, you begin to shift your environment, you begin to shift your mindset, and it's so valuable. So, and if you saw my Instagram, the room was full. Most rooms are one size. This was a 2-size room, so it was 2 rooms that had been combined into one, and it was still standing room only. So what he talks about is so valuable. So definitely check out Brett Ledbetter. You can see him on What Drives Winning, is a lot of his social media stuff, and then get his book too. It's so valuable. So last year at the convention, there was Raymond Vahine. You may have seen me tweet about it. You may have even been here and heard about it, how he just let rip on his own beliefs versus what was currently on offer at the convention or on offer with US Soccer. And this year he wasn't here, he wasn't invited back, but we saw Todd Bean, and he has a very similar approach to it too. He sat down and sat in the middle of his session, everybody sat there with a pen and paper, and he sits down and says, what's going on here? He talks about a story of him being jet lagged in his room and the idea that came to him at 4 a.m. And he mentioned that there are typically 5 fundamentals of soccer in the USA. And he says that he's asked enough people to gain these 5 common. And you may already know them as passing, dribbling, heading, shooting, and receiving. So as he sits there and talks about it, he says, I'm going to show you how to get all of that into your practice right now. And all the players are in a line. They pass the ball to one person. That person receives the ball, dribbles around a couple of cones, takes a shot on the goal, then runs to the side of the goal where somebody throws the ball and he heads the ball into a pug goal. And so I have some audio from that session, so I will include that here so you can listen to Todd's summary on this.
Because they're passing, doing something, I don't know, that looks pretty cool. Then they're receiving, they're dribbling, he's shooting, and he's heading. So if I do this for 5 or 6 years, yeah, Greg Berhalter's going to win the World Cup, no problem. Your club's got the state championship, you're going to win the 15th showcase that you're going to this summer. Okay? So as you do this, it's quite logical. Here's the problem I have with this. It's a very limited definition of what the football is about. This is a very restricted definition of fundamentals. Who's on? Well, you can say he's on, and he's on because he's jumping, and he's on, the goal is on because he's being a good volunteer. You're on. The ratio of on to off, but on means not thinking. This is obedience training. I don't know if you ever watched some strange channels when it's 4 in the morning and that's when they have the pet shows. Dogs can do this. Dogs can do this.
He said dogs could do this. So hopefully we are not doing this, or if we are, we're not going to do it much more. And then Todd moved into positional play. And I'm not going to try and explain positional play. There is so much content out there. Hit up my man Paddy King. Hit up Todd Bean, go to Barcelona, go and take the Tovo course. And I think that that will be one of the next steps that I take in terms of my own coaching education. But the idea of angles and distance and timing and lines and situation. And as Todd was showing the rondos that move from 4v1 to 4v2 to 4v2 plus 1 to 4v3 plus 2, and the expansion of these rondos, you're always looking at angles, you're always looking at distance, you're always looking at timing. So you're looking at, and I guess I'm going to do what I said I wasn't going to do, but the angles, the way you receive the ball, your angles of support, the distance from how far away you are from the player, how far away is your pressure, to the timing of when to move for the ball, when do you play the ball. That is always there. And as the players were playing, they were making lots of mistakes. But even within a 15-minute window where he stopped once or twice to show us as a crowd, as a host of coaches, that he could show us, and he constantly mentioned the fact that he would never stop this. He would not stop this. He would not stop this. And he repeats a lot of the same sessions so that the players, build task understanding, they're able to complete the task, they understand the task, but then also as a player they can improve because they can begin to solve the solutions. Then as it expands, it moves into the lines in the situation. So the lines of players, the lines of passes, then the situation of positions relative to the ball. Are you able to hold a certain shape within the players that are key to the situation of the game? So he had target players that were on the ends to offer depth and then rotated them to offer width. And then the players that had previously begun to provide width were still trying to provide width even though there were already wide players there. So then the idea of their positioning shifting and the need for them to create depth on their own. And he had mentioned that he'd be very surprised if the players could do it. And actually one player begun to understand that they needed to create that depth for their team to be successful. So he goes into it with this notion and this idea of what he wants to see. This is all part of his game model. It's all part of his belief. Then he watches it happen and he doesn't really stop the game. So we tie in some periodization as we do, where we try and identify the amount of workload that we want players to do and the rotation of positions because the defenders were working really hard. But there's no true stoppages. There's a lot of coaching in the flow. There's a lot of constantly asking himself, what are the angles? What is the distance? What's the timing? Where are the lines? What's the situation? And then if it's something that's really fundamentally wrong, it's something that he can address with individuals or address as his coaching in the flow to encourage the players to find new positions. And it's a constant. He talks about it being north, east, south, and west, that there's multi-directional as a game can be. And we think about direction kind of being two ways, as north and south to goals. But the multi-direction aspect is something that I think is really important in terms of keeping possession, because keeping possession can be either way. There's not always backwards, but there is sideways there's a necessity to go sideways to create gaps, to create lines, and then you're still focusing on your angles, your distance, your timing, your lines, and your situation. So it's fantastic with Todd. He's super active on Twitch. I'm going to tag him in this too so he can listen and enjoy my summary of his session, because I thought it was fantastic, and it was one of the most packed sessions along with Brett Ledbetter too. So I really hope that you've enjoyed my summary from today at the convention. It's an amazing place. It's the adult Disneyland. Unfortunately, I leave tomorrow. I have my A-license assessment on Sunday, so I have to leave before I can really enjoy any more of the convention. But it's been amazing. I recommend everybody to make it here. Find a way to get here. Find someone that will sponsor you. Find a state organization that will give you a reason to come and be a part of this if you're not already here. And if you are here and I missed you, well, I apologize, and I'll see you in Los Angeles in 2021. So thank you, everyone. There's a couple of interviews coming out soon from Eric and then also from Dan Abrahams that are just amazing. So watch this space.